Hello everyone and welcome back to Game Brigade. My name is Brian and today I'm going to bring you another crowdfunding deep dive as we talk about Dark Blood from Meeplepug. This is live on GameFound right now and I want to talk about this game because for one, this really surprised me. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So I want to talk about it. I give it its due because I think it's important to kind of get these videos out there when I want to talk about games that are really, really special. And I think Dark Blood does have some of that specialness to it. So if that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to watch the rest of the video. And without further ado, let's go. Okay, so what is a good way to describe Dark Blood? Because there's a lot of movement going on here. There's a lot of different things happening. At its core, Dark Blood is first and foremost an area majority game because nearly everything that you do in this game will resolve around the specific locations and the workers that you activate from within those locations. So with that, it's also a worker placement game. You have some take that with this game, which I'll talk about a little bit more. You have resource management and blind bidding in sort of a way. So let's talk about real quick kind of what's happening in this game, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the mechanics that I really thought were interesting and worth talking about more. So as I said, this game is an area majority game, and each player is going to have a almost fully asymmetrical faction. So we have one that's kind of placed over here, and we'll show these in more detail. In fact, let me actually push this player board over, and I'm going to bring the faction that I just played with down here. So here, I'm pretty sure you guys can see this. Here is the faction that I just recently played with. It has this miniature that included the succubus characters. I'm not sure what they are. But basically, each player is going to have a fully asymmetrical player board, which has different types of abilities that you're going to utilize to gain different types of advantage. Now, these are also playing in terms of a theme that each faction has. So what my characters like to do are place these skulls on the board. These skulls will help you in terms of the controlling the area majority section of the game, which we'll get into. These are called the sigils, and we'll be placing these throughout the board. So my faction really wanted to focus on those. At the center of my player board here, we have different types of spells or abilities that I'm able to activate. And when I return my workers or activate my workers from different types of locations, I am able to place them in these locations to activate the ability by paying the cost and gaining the benefit. There's also a ability that is the only part of this game that's really not asymmetrical. It's the only part from that, which is placing your hexes into the baggie. Now there is a baggie we'll be drawing from, which I'll go into more detail, but I can place my hex in there. When I do that though, it unlocks additional passive abilities that I can take advantage of to further my abilities or do better things. Now what's interesting about those as well, all of these for each player are double-sided. So that you actually have kind of a decision choice in how you want to play each round, because as you unlock these, we are able to choose them, and they will also become unlocked because when you draw your sigil from the bag, you will be placing them back, removing that ability from having that spell until you obviously place them back in. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, so you have 4 of those down here that are all covered. Again, these are all double-sided. You also have your main miniature, your main creature, which can be deployed into a place on the board. They also have their own asymmetrical power, which is also double-sided, so players can take advantage of whatever strategy that they're currently working for based on their abilities that they've done. Also, the player boards, the character boards here, the spells that we all have, these are also able to be upgraded to a better version of the spell you have, sometimes reducing the cost or increasing the power that you can utilize. So there are different types of ways that we can utilize these abilities. They could be by spending different types of resources or our silver, or some of these peasants that are on the board to activate and gain their abilities. Some of them are consuming blood, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail too. from there. So that's what the player board is. So now that we've talked about that, let's go ahead and bring the main board kind of back in line so we can kind of talk about how this game works. So at the start of the game, there's a very, very interesting mechanic that I really like, and that is setting up the bags. So each player is going to gain one of these bags, and inside these bags are going to be a variable amount of blood tokens based on these tokens that were drawn and placed randomly in each bag, and also corresponding with the token. So what does that mean? There is a ratio 5, 0, 4, 1, 3, 2, etc., where the points, the amount of blood you get at the start of the game, is counterintuitive in terms of the less points later in the game. So for example, if I receive the bag that has 5 blood in it, it's going to have a 0 token in it, which means that this bag is worth 0 the victory points at the end of the game. There's also another interesting mechanic with that. There are these tokens that have kind of the hanging tree art on the back. You'll place one of those tokens into the bag as well, because that's going to be determining your first or your player part in the dark favor, which is also kind of the turn order track. Once all these bags are designed, you're going to hand them out randomly to each player, and then players can then kind of examine and see how much blood they've got. Also learn their starting player, which looks like I am in first position. Not first, it's the 1 position. So I'll place my skull here in the 1 position. Now this is also worth 1 point at the end of the game as well, so you have to keep these. And at the end of the game, your final position on this track, which is changeable, will be given points as well, with 6 being in first, 4 being in second, 2 being in third, and no points for the person in last place. So for the balancing aspect, yes, this person who starts here in the 3rd position gets no initial lead off, because they're not going to end with these initial points. But because they got the 3, they're getting 3 points at the end of the game for just drawing that bag. And that's an interesting little gameplay there. Because obviously you're able to move up this track, so they could get 3 points and find themselves higher in that track and get additional victory points as well. So that's an interesting mechanic. So the blood is very important in this game, because when we place our workers, so let's kind of explain how this works. Let's look at the board. First off, we have these wooden tokens placed throughout the board right now. These indicate the amount of resources that are going to be available to the workers who activate those locations. So what does that mean? So let's say we have a player who goes here, we've got a player that goes here, a player goes here, another player goes here. We're just going to place some tokens. I've only got 2 players out right now, unfortunately, but we'll just give an example of how this might look. So for example now, let's say, where's number 1? Number 1 is over here. So this is the only person here. He's got 2 peasants at his location. So when he activates, he has a choice of what they want to do. And this is really interesting part in terms of the area majority location, because when you activate this location, if you're using any of your abilities in your player board, it's going to reference the location you're in. So it's really important that when you're placing your stuff, you're analyzing multiple aspects of the game. There's multiple things going on here that you need to be aware of. And it's not just how many resources are available to the location, because if there are any sigils already on the board, that's going to define which locations are going to be defiled, which is going to be available victory points. So maybe you want to have access to using your abilities in those locations. Maybe you are going for resources. There's also take that aspects in this game, which is important to note, because these are going to be activating in random orders each time with the placement of these priority posters. So each time you're going to reset those and place them out. So maybe you want to go later in the rounds, placing your guys out, so you're not being interfered with people who do have take that interactions. So that's super important. So when this player activates, they're going to have to choose one of their cultists, and they have an option of what they want to do, referencing either their player board, the ability here that's on the location card in front of them, or placing as well onto one of these locations. So if they do choose to place here, they will collect the resource down here and the number that's on the card. So this would be 4 of the anvil dust, which they would then take those required resources and place them into their player board. so that they can then utilize those resources for activating abilities or upgrading their abilities to being a higher level. So you're going to go from the order from there, from 1 to 2 to 3. So let's show how this works. Every location has a max amount of number that you can have for the amount of cultists in those locations, which is 6. And there's a specific rule when you're placing your tokens or your workers. So the first time I place a cultist in a location, I have to place one cultist. The next person, by going from the track here, which tells you who goes in order, then places their workers. If there's already a cultist there, they can place up to 2 cultists. Now the next person that goes there, and you only have 4 cultists to start the game with, by the way, can then either place, if there's 3 cultists there, they can place up to 3 cultists as well. Remember, with maxing it out at 6 cultists. So if someone wanted to do that and really lock this place in, they could do that. And then you will go with who has the majority amount of cultists in this location. If there was a tie, for example, like this, you will then reference the favor track to see who has a higher favor to then go in terms of the order in that regard. So let's say I have the favor. I can take advantage of this ability. You may kill a villager to gain 2 blood. We're going to do that. We're going to go and kill this villager. I will gain 2 blood. And I place that blood into my black baggie here. The black baggie is how we're going to be bidding once we get to that defile thing. We'll talk about that in a second. After that, players, let's say, are going to do some things. We're going to fast forward in terms of order. Say we've taken some actions. And some way, somehow, we have some sigils, these skulls, now located on this section. Once all the locations have done their actions, 3, 4, then 5, we then are going to go into the defile step. The defile step is going to ask which location has the most amount of sigils on it. We're then going to go through the steps where you are going to take your blood in your hand, any amount you want to do, and you're going to bid a certain number of that blood to try to be the one who is offered the most for this location. Each blood is worth 1 point. Each sigil on the board is worth 2 points, so 2 blood. So in this regard, the red player has 4, and the kind of orange yellowish player has 2, plus whatever they're bidding. Now, just because we're in this, just in terms of our sigils, the other players also have the ability to bid on this if they want to. And the person who bids, whoever wins, all of their blood will be lost. They will return their sigils back to their player board, and then they will collect the first defile token, which will be worth the amount of points that are printed on the card. The players who bid and did not win will receive half their blood back, rounded up, and then receive 1 blood per sigil that's still on the board. So this player would gain a blood there, and then return their thing back, and then the location card will be flipped over. So now the location ability that was offering is no longer available. After that, all these tokens are going to be taken. The villager token is also going to be grabbed. If you're playing with the Inquisitor module, which includes these additional tokens, those will also be grabbed. I'm not going to do it for this example. And you place these back in the bag. Now, I'm going to give you another example that I'm kind of cheating here just to give you for play. Next round, we're now going into the next round. Remember, we shuffle up these locations. I'll just do a quick shuffle just for the sake of it. Next, in order of the locations, you draw tokens from the bag. So I would say grab this one. I then grab this one. We go to 2. And now I grabbed a location that I actually upgraded for my player board. This would go here, but instead what it's going to do, it's going to place one of my sigils back in there, and this returns back to my player board, covering up my location. So the ability that I got, unfortunately, is no longer available until I reuse it to put it back in the bag, but I have gained additional sigils to go forward towards the defiling step later in the game, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we've talked about the bidding. We've talked about the area majority, which is important because remember, as I said, when you activate your guys, such as consume a blood, place a sigil, the guy that I activate to do that ability, the sigil, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, has to go there. So if I'm wanting to like really push this location, I have to think ahead of time. Okay, I know where my sigil placed because of the placement at the beginning of the game. Maybe I need to make sure I focus on putting workers here in this location so that when I do this ability to consume a blood to put a sigil, it's going to go where I want it to be to push my thing. So that's important to remember. That is, every location is important, especially also when you do this ability eventually, when you upgrade your place a hex, it turns into the ability to also place your monstrosity, your big monster. So let's say I did that here. I used this worker to place that. Then that's where the succubus would then be placed in here. And I would also take this into the token and put it into the bag. So that's kind of the idea of the game. You are playing to these locations, trying to utilize strategies, being aware that every single character, there's 4 factions in this game, all do something completely different. You've got players that have some take that. You've got players who are placing sigils. You've got players who are generating a lot of blood. You've got players that are placing a lot of movement with the different types of workers here, these peasants on the board. So there's a lot of movement parts going on, which is cool because it offers a unique perspective of play each time you play it with every faction, as well as the ability to have the alternative backs or sides. It gives you a little bit more play as well with each additional faction, which is cool. At the end of the game, though, there's a lot of scoring. So the last game we played, I was playing, as I said, this red faction, and I went all in on wanting to defile locations and really utilize the power that I had with my sigils. And so by the end of the game, when I secured the final victory points here, I thought I had the game locked. But there's a lot more going on. You could call it catch-up mechanics, but there's a lot more strategy involved that are not talked about enough in types of these games, which offers additional strategy. So as I mentioned, the first thing, obviously, you have the defile points. You collect any of those defile points you collected, you score points for. The next thing they want to know is how much blood did you have left in your bag at the end of the game that you didn't bid with. The player with the most, who's also highest in the favorite track in case of ties, will gain 3 additional points. Next player gains 2 additional points, 1 additional point, etc. That'll be for all of these as we go through. The next one is for workers who had summoned the most amount of workers, because you have 4 workers that are not available at the start of the game. You total can have 8 total workers. But 4 of them start outside of the game. You're going to have to summon them by usually sacrificing cultists or doing something. My character, for example, though, I would kill enemy cultists to summon mine. So that was something that's, again, part of that take that mechanics. Whoever has the most would gain 3, and then 2, and then 1, etc. The final scoring point is your spell book. Who is the first person to, or who is the person who has the most spells maxed, as well as highest on the favorite track will gain those points, which is important. But then alternatively, your order on the favorite track, remember, that also counts. So whoever gets that will get 6 points, 4 points, or 3 points. Then your points that you had for your turn order track also matters. So since I started at 1, I'm only going to get 1 point. So if this player had somehow managed to find their way getting up here, they're going to get not only the 3 points for starting the 3, but they're also going to generate those 6 points. So there's a lot of strategy in terms of what you want to do to try to win the game. And the last thing you have are the secret objectives. You draw 2 at the start of the game. You choose one based on your kind of strategy you want to play out, and that's additional points that you can gain from there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of utilize this. Now, I really was excited with this. And I will say, as we played this game, through our time, I found myself multiple times being like, oh man, I didn't consider that aspect. And it mostly came to the use of the abilities, because the asymmetricalness, as you play this for the first few times, you start feeling like, oh, maybe your ability is too powerful, or this ability doesn't do anything. But then you start thinking, oh, you know what? That actually balances it well. So let me give you an example. One of the factions has the ability to draw tokens from the bag. And then they're going to score the amount of blood. They're going to score blood based on the resource count, the number that's on the resource. So it kind of can be variable. But they have the ability, if they upgrade or have the thing upgraded, that if they draw one of my tokens, it's returned back to my player board, which means I am now set further behind. They felt like that was kind of weak. But I was like, here's the thing. You are not only hurting me, you're setting yourself up to have even more available to have yourself be drawn and be placed into these location token tile areas to place your sigils, because you're reducing the potential amount of hexes that we have in the bag and making sure that only yours are still in the bag, which I think was really powerful. But contrarily though, my faction, when I upgraded it, turned these sigils from being worth 2 blood to 3 blood. So when you're in this blind bidding phase, me having 2 sigils in a location, I'm already representing 6 blood bid. That's so powerful too. So you have these options. I really like the power swings, and you have to kind of think about, well, how can I utilize these different types of skills or abilities comparably to what my opponents do who are doing something completely different. I think it's so interesting. So that is the quick of it. Now I want to talk about some of the things I didn't like. There were some things I thought were interesting, or maybe I just didn't get enough time with the game to feel it out. That's totally fair. But the first one is the peasants. There are 8 total peasants in this game, and the peasants offer ways for you to utilize your abilities. Most of the player boards have some sort of way of sacrificing a peasant, which you remove it from the board, to gain an advantage. But these peasants can also be completely removed from the game permanently, and that's with the favor track. So you'll see right here, there are 3 worker placement options for you to access, which all has the peasant location as well as an additional either resource, a blood, or a silver that you can spend to take advantage of that. So let's say, for example, I'm at this location and I choose to go here and sacrifice a peasant as well as a silver. We'll take the silver from my player board and put it over here. Now this peasant is removed permanently and taken to the trees here. And if you have the gallows, you could gallow them up if you wish. We actually played with them not gallowed. I found it was much easier doing that. But now that removes that, and then I move up 1 on the track. So that's how you move up that track. But that removes that peasant from the game. Now, if early in the game, players are racing to sacrifice these peasants to race up this track or trying to figure out ways to get up this track, you are then hurting yourselves throughout the rest of the game because you have limited your abilities. Now that might be thematic in the sense that you're pushing your power here, so you're weakening yourself here, so you have to have that forethought. But like, if one player says, well, I don't want to do that because I want to take advantage of my powers, and everyone else is like, well, screw you, I want to get higher on the track, we're just going to sacrifice all the workers, there's going to come a point where there could be 0 peasants left, and then you have abilities that really just can't do anything because you don't have the peasants to sacrifice. I don't know if that means having 10 peasants over 8 peasants, which gives it a little more variety and ability to have them on the board, or just don't have them be sacrificed permanently. I don't know. But it definitely came into situations where we had people who couldn't do much when they had so many workers because they gathered them, but they didn't have any peasants on the board to actually interact with because they were sacrificed. So I thought that was a little interesting throughout the game. The other thing that I'm not totally against this, it was just situations that arose, was the area majority, and having everything that you do based on the worker that you sent there and then activated also has to reference this location. There was abilities that I had, for example, that when placing your first sigil, you can place 2 instead. But if I wanted to place that at another location, because I wanted that to be the defiling location, I had to make sure that I was doing it, making sure I could place a sigil here, and sometimes I couldn't, but I could do it here, which kind of hurt my abilities at times. So that was something to be aware of. I don't think it's necessarily a penalty or a bad thing, but it definitely came up a few times where I was frustrated because I couldn't do the things I wanted to do because of the restrictions the game was offering. But the restrictions are there in a sense to help you stay focused in a certain direction and kind of do things, as well as balancing the game in a way so that the abilities and the interactions are not running rampant, because some of the abilities are very powerful. The final thing that I wanted to bring attention to, and just that it made some unfun mechanic at times, was the take that is found in this game. Take that in any sort of Euro game, and I see this as a Euro game. It's a worker placement, resource management, bidding game. It's very much in its core a Euro game. But then having the random abilities where you can strike your opponent and sometimes just punish them specifically can be a little hard. And especially when you are needing some of these things to further the game, it can be really detrimental. So for example, let's talk about this yellow faction. They have an ability here that they can activate called Ashes and Dust. Destroy 3 resources from an enemy cult. So you literally just take those 3 resources, that could be their entire activation, and just get rid of them. And if they upgrade them though, they instead steal. They're the only faction that really can affect those resources, so that's annoying. They also have the ability to kill by consuming up one of these resources that I just showed. They can actually kill 2 cultists of an opponent's cultists from a location, effectively removing that action from them. But when you kill a cultist, they will always go to the unused section first. They'll check to see, well, do they have any inactive cultists? They'll always go there first. Or if all 4 unused have already been there, then they'll go back to the player board for next round. So that could really hurt a player, and at times it can feel really targeted because maybe you're the only one who has resources because you just gathered 3 resources because you're planning on upgrading, but you need to gather more resources to finish the upgrading path. And then this person says, well, I'm just going to nuke you and take those resources from you. It makes it very interesting. So interesting in a sense that it's like, I don't know. So I'm not a big fan of take that though. So take my thoughts with that and understand that I'm not a fan of take that when it comes to these types of games. And I think there's a lot of things that are great here. And I wonder if the take that could be, modified in a way that it doesn't feel like it's direction. But I do think some people might love that aspect because we talked about that too. I was like, well, if you think about it thematically, we're 4 cultists fighting over a area here, and we all believe that our ideal is the correct one. So why would they not, try to screw with you and do things like that? It makes sense thematically. But I don't know, it definitely felt bad, especially when I got hit multiple times by this. Another faction can return up to 3 workers back to your player board, which is just brutal. So there is things. And in fact, one of them is when you just summon this guy, you just kill a worker, a cultist, as soon as you place it. You're just like, okay, place it here, this guy's dead. So there's definitely a lot of take that going on here. It's subtle, but definitely there. The final thing, and this is outside of it, this is personal taste. So this part of it is not about the game, so make sure you're aware of that. But I do think that the upside down cross is a little interesting choice for me. I don't want to get into sort of theology or religious ideas, but I do think I would have chosen something different than the upside down cross. That's just personal taste. I know that there are players who in my group didn't really have interest of playing the game because of this sign, and only that sign, and a little bit of the player boards having the pentagram on it, but this was mostly the biggest issue they had with it. And I feel bad because I feel like this game is really special. It's an interesting game that doesn't really match any other games I have in my collection, and I think a lot of people would enjoy this game for some of the unique stuff it brings to the table, but then you could potentially be losing guests, or not guests, you could be losing potential players because of something that doesn't really add anything to the game. It doesn't do anything. In fact, this specific mini, I don't think even affects the board when he gets called. So he just sits there, and I don't necessarily think it's needed. So that's something that I would probably consider potentially removing or changing, but that's me. And I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on that specifically, because I'm curious, am I alone in that thought, or has anyone considered or decided not to back this game because of some of the imagery or the themes? I'd love to know in that regard. So I think that wraps it up with my thoughts on Dark Blood. Like I said, I was very, very impressed. And as we finished this game and played through, I was like, guys, I think this is really something special. And I definitely would love to play this again in the future. I'm looking forward to it. In fact, several people in the player group were like, I would play this again 100%. I'm like, I'm excited to get this back to the table and see what other options we have, maybe some of the other factions and how they play out and how it feels being a different faction comparatively to what you felt. Because sometimes you're like, man, that guy's so powerful. And then someone says the same thing about me. I'm like, really? I didn't feel like I did that powerful, but I'd like to see what their perspective feels like, seeing what someone's abilities are doing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think many of you would enjoy this. I want to know more in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. But without further ado, I want to say thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe if you're new, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.